that. Great. So welcome to the session. I'm Ellen from the Northern Real Farming Conference team. And yeah, I'm really delighted to welcome the Cinderwood Market Garden team. They're going to give us a review of their first year and how they set up, and talk specifically about their collaborations with chef-owned restaurants in Manchester. So I'm going to hand over to them. Feel free to put any comments in the chat as we go, but we're also a small group, so I'm sure there'll be chance for a discussion at the end. So I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you so much, everyone.
Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm Joseph. This is Michael, head grower at Cinderwood, and Richard. We're partners. We've been working together now for, I suppose, 2 years. 2 years if you consider the planning phase. We actually presented last year with the foresight of just about to enter into our first growing season. And I think the main thing that we're trying to do here is just to share the challenges that we faced in being a small 1 acre market garden, how we've kind of attacked and taken on those challenges, some of the successes now from going through our first year, and then also, but based on that, what our vision for the second year and what we have planned and how we're going to adapt going into next year. I'd like personally to make the session as informal as possible, and if anybody just wants to chat and ask questions, then don't hesitate to butt in and get a conversation going. So I think if we maybe start with you, Michael.
Yeah.
And bring in start with the weather pattern and how you felt, how you got on with the seasons.
Yeah, it's been an interesting year for growing. I think a lot of people have struggled with the weather this year. It's been a weird one, but I suppose that's kind of year after year now. It's each year is a bit different and a bit strange. So yeah, it's been, I think the weather's been a bit of a challenge at times. So we had a really late spring up here that then followed into really dry kind of June and July, and we were just getting kind of our watering set up. And yeah, so we kind of struggled with the lack of rain a little bit. And then of course, August was, super wet. So we had things like, the mildew came on the courgettes really early. We got blight not too early on the tomatoes, and we did manage to kind of get through that a little bit. I think that the plants were strong enough that we did manage to get through it. But yeah, it's certainly been a challenge for the first year. But yeah, you never know what you're going to get. So you just have to kind of get into it and just go straight for it.
I think just going, one of the biggest challenges was that we weren't, and we still don't have the full infrastructural setup out in the field. Obviously because of the time limits and the time constraints of getting things in the ground and going to market in the first season, we didn't have, and we still don't have, electricity, so we don't have mains power. We also found out quite late in the day, when we were sort of already into the first kind of quarter of the year, that we didn't have the mains pressure from that we needed to water or to irrigate sufficiently. So that led us into our first kind of real challenge, was that we needed to find and install a pump to create enough pressure to irrigate. And without electricity, we then had to get around how we would power the pump. So I think, just to be completely transparent, this is one of the main things to focus on for next year. And one of the solutions we need to come up with is how we're going to figure out the power issue. We were able to install a temporary generator, but of course then kind of going backwards because you're powering your electricity with diesel, which is of course unsustainable.
Yeah, there's always challenges with whatever kind of land you take on, and I think there's always pros and cons. So we went into a completely green farm, and it's with just like a mix of kind of herbs and grasses on there. So going into greenfields, like, you get the benefit of that. It's super fertile, incredible soil, but you know we are a little bit off grid compared to, I suppose, you know, you might get some land on a farm where you do have all of that infrastructure put in place already, but with that, it might be somewhere that's already been worked a lot, so you have to put a lot more time and effort into kind of rebuilding the soil structure. I was listening to someone this year who started, I think, 2 years ago, and that's the exact kind of thing they had. Is they just came in, wanted to get growing, so they just got straight into the soil and then found out after a while that it wasn't that fertile and that there was going to have to be a process of rebuilding. What we've got is an incredibly fertile soil, and again, the same thing. You know, we just wanted to get into it and get growing as soon as possible. As soon as we saw it, we wanted to get some vegetables in there. But you know, as you go through the year, you kind of pick up on things like this, and I think it's easy to say in hindsight now, maybe we could have waited another year and just spent a whole year kind of looking at the land and prepping. But there's no better way of learning about a piece of land than actually working on it. So I think
just to go in, just to further, you know, some of the ways of looking at this, the fertility of the soil, which is absolutely incredible, because Jane's been moving the cows on it for years. It also creates a massive challenge in that the weed, because we went no dig and we didn't turn the soil, trying to kind of retain those root systems and the fertility in there. We had huge issues with weeds. We also didn't have the time or the startup capital to lay compost, so we literally just went straight into the ground, which has been incredible for the crops. But the weeds are, I mean, if you're looking at the perimeter of the market garden, around our 1 acre is just like 6 foot tall grasses. So that because of the labor involved and working everything by hand, it's definitely been one of the biggest challenges, right? The weed suppression.
No dig, it seems like. So we've kind of chosen to go no dig. We started off kind of min-till, so we just like kind of broke the ground, and then this year now we're not going to break it again, and we've laid plastic, and we're going to lay compost this year, and I think, you know, we approached no dig because from what we've been seeing from others who are practicing no dig, you can get to a point where for a small scale market garden, there isn't that need for a lot of machinery, which makes it accessible to kind of small farmers with not a lot of capital. It also, you know, the evidence is that over time it reduces the weed burden to a point where there isn't that pressure. And also with no dig, we were kind of hearing from other people that it was the best way to get the best flavor, the best way, you know, leaving the soil to do what it needs to do, leaving the soil kind of ecosystem to really kind of build up and disturbing that as little as possible is what gives access to all those kind of micronutrients, which adds to the flavor. And for us, working with chefs, making sure that we have the best flavor is obviously really important. But having said that, you know, everything in growing, I think, is a double-edged sword, really.
Well, I think
we have this massive weed burden.
Just as you mentioned, and working with chefs, it might be a good point time to point out that was the goal of Cinderwood Market Garden, was that our relationship is built upon myself being a chef and Michael being a grower, and how we could the want to explore that relationship and try to make it work, and try to come up with a system that could create a model for other people to perhaps follow in the future, based off of a need, from my perspective, of better access to organic vegetables that taste good and are nutrient dense, and Michael's want as a young grower to fill that gap and to explore it from his side. So that's definitely another one of the challenges from year one, is that we went directly. We haven't worked with any wholesale. All of the connections that we have within the organic veg market are the requirement is to be organic certified, which of course we aren't. And we've certainly found through exploring the supply and demand through this first year that it probably would be beneficial for us going forward in the future to be organic certified, and we're still on the fence of whether or not to go down that road. But
yeah, I think so we wanted to really break ground with working in that way, with working with restaurants and chefs.
Going direct to restaurants.
Yeah, for me as a grower, my kind of farming mentors had kind of usually told me to steer clear of chefs. That, you know, the kind of the reputation of chefs is that, you know, they want everything kind of when they want it. Seasonality is just a word, and they have very specific kind of requirements, and they're very, you know, they can get things cheap. So if you're not kind of competing with that, then that's a problem.
There's definitely truth in that, though.
Yeah.
You know, and that,
well, I think that's an
found
old kind of way of thinking.
Right.
And what I started to kind of find from meeting chefs was that actually there are a lot of younger, kind of more progressive chefs who really care about where their food comes from, and who, you know, understand things about kind of soil fertility and stuff like that, which is amazing, speaking to chefs and hearing that. And, you know, understanding that seasonal veg doesn't, you know, just mean kind of the same thing all through the year.
I think the best example of that was broad beans, right?
Yeah. Well, that's
the broad beans came late this year, certainly for us. And by the time the beans were ready and it fully fruiting, we were going to restaurants with them in what, like June, July? July?
Yeah, it's June. July. Yeah, June they started, and then it was July that they really hit.
So by the time July came around and we were walking into restaurants in Manchester saying, we've got these amazing broad beans, which everybody told us they would bite our hands off for fresh broad beans at the beginning of the year. Everybody was saying, like, well, it's not broad bean season's been. And you're like, well, it hasn't, because these are the beans, the beans are ready now.
But that to me steps up to another level, in a sense. You know, you're trying to have chefs understand what seasonality is in the UK, but you're honing in on something further, and that's seasonality in the Northwest.
Yeah, so that's tough, because they, you know, obviously chefs are part of this kind of a wider scene. So they might be seeing restaurants in London putting something on the menu, and that might be coming up from Norfolk, or it might even be coming down like up from Cornwall or whatever. So, you know, for us, obviously the season is very different, and so, you know, seasonal has to be tied in with local as well, because seasonality changes like as you go up the country.
I think just to go back to the challenge of supply and demand, without the use of having an outlet for wholesale, or for the flexibility of being able to create a veg box scheme where you can pretty much put whatever you need to put in the box, we started to realize how difficult supply and demand is to manage. So, for example, when we first began and the first crops were coming out in March, we were dealing only with leaf soft lettuces and some early onions, and that's not really a great deal of variety to try to sell people on, and to hook people in. And if you've only got 50 or 150 lettuces a week, you can only therefore work with a handful of establishments. So we had to select very carefully who we tried to partner with in the very beginning. Maybe 5 or 6 small establishments that took only lettuce and onions for the first sort of month. And then as more crops came in, we had to slowly start expanding those conversations and those relationships with other kitchens and other restaurants around the city, and start introducing more and more customers as we had more produce. So by the time we were into the middle of summer, we were finding that we were starting to run into glut, which is obviously heartbreaking to go through when you suddenly go from a position where you haven't got enough of anything, and then suddenly you have too much and you can't, and you're bringing everybody that to try and sell a wheelbarrow of cucumbers or tomatoes that are over ripening, and this kind of stuff. So through the summer, we found we actually were growing more than we could actually sell, which is going to be an interesting thing to look at going into year 2. Now that we have a database to look at.
Yeah, because it was definitely in the first year, it was really a case of kind of building the plane as we fly in it, in terms of kind of building that customer base. Because I think if you start and your outlet is wholesale, you at the start of the year would kind of communicate. So you'd call, you'd speak to Organic North, and you'd say, we're starting this is what we're going to have, and then that's it. You've got your customer and you send them all your veg. Similarly, I suppose with a CSA, although with a CSA I guess you do have to build up your customer base, where you can start with a number of customers who are set, and then that's it. You go into the year and you know what you've got. Whereas with us, with working with chefs, obviously they want to taste it before they want to kind of sign up and start getting lots. I was actually surprised, to be honest, by how many we're getting straight on board without tasting it, actually. I think a lot of them understood that, okay, it's local, it's picked the day before, it's going to be good.
Well, that might be a good way to introduce the ordering system as well. One of the challenges was to introduce kitchens to a new way of ordering that doesn't really exist, certainly where we are here in Manchester. You have it a little bit down south with some of the other sort of peers like Flourish, and what's going on with Dan Cox down in where is he, in Cornwall, where you're providing an update, and Field 28 to be fair up here as well. When you're creating an ordering sheet every Sunday night, which is what Michael does. He's writing on a Sunday night, hi guys, this is what we have, this is the reflection of this week. So it's educating cooks at the same time. This is how the week's been up here, this is what we're looking at for next week, this is perhaps something to start thinking about for the coming weeks further on, and then this is the availability list this week. You then have Sunday to think about it. Monday night, your order needs to be in by midnight. Tuesday, Michael then harvests all the orders, and Wednesday, within 24 hours, the veg is delivered to the door. We have the same thing for a Wednesday night, Thursday for a Friday delivery. And that, to me, that was a really simple way of working, because it's actually more flexible than what was currently available. But if you're going from a non-organic system where you're ordering conventionally in a kitchen, where you can pick up the phone at midnight any day of the week and the produce is there first thing in the morning, it's actually very difficult to get chefs to convert into this new way of thinking, into this new system. You're literally trying to break down existing infrastructure.
You're battling convenience.
Yeah, well, exactly that. You're trying to convince people not to go with the convenient option but to do the more difficult thing, which requires more thinking and more planning, but the reward is greater. And that was quite a challenge to start off with. In the first, certainly the first few months, people were not ordering on time, people pulling in last minute orders, and people just simply forgetting to order, and then you're losing revenue, things aren't selling.
Yeah, you've got to think about what's the kind of the wider value of your produce and your kind of your business, I suppose. So or your offering. So we're not offering them that convenience, but what are we offering them instead? And one of the big things that I like going into it, we knew it was going to be a kind of a thing, but I was really surprised by just how much value the story adds for chefs. So now in a lot of restaurants in the dining room, the servers will be speaking to the guests about where the food's come from and how it's grown. And so if you're ordering from one of the big kind of the big restaurant suppliers, you are getting that convenience and it's super easy, but you're not getting that story with it. You don't necessarily know where it's come from. You don't know the farmer personally. Whereas with us, I've been in that morning dropping off that veg that I picked yesterday. So there's a massive story to be told to guests there, which adds to the flavor, really.
That's actually, I agree with you there with that. It adds so much value. And you actually just you've just touched on another one of the challenges, which was that we didn't, distribution was something that to be completely honest, I think we overlooked in setting up. Was that, Michael will grow all this veg and he'll harvest on Tuesday, Michael will drop it off. But then we realized, actually, hold on, firstly, we need a van for that. And then secondly, we actually will be losing our head grower 2 days out of the week, because we just potentially overlooked how long it takes for anybody to do that delivery run all around Greater Manchester, through the city. And when you're dealing with 15, 16, 20 different restaurants, it actually adds up. And then you've got to then try and work out the value between whether or not Michael's time is more valuable than paying for a driver, but you can't afford a driver. So
I think my sort of belief about it was that I really felt that anyone who is delivering the veg should be a grower as well, should be growing on the farm, because I think they should be able to talk to the chef about, the chef needs to have that connection to the farm. So they need to be able to talk to the chef. And I think really glad I did it this way in the first year. I think it has been really hard, but it's obviously been great for me to build up that relationship with all the chefs. But I think probably going into our second year, we are now looking at getting a driver to do it. So I think that's a bit of a compromise, that we might end up having someone doing it who doesn't maybe know as much about what's happening on the farm. But then that'll just mean that I'll be on the phone a lot more while I'm working with the chefs and kind of talking to them about what's going on. Having that communication with the chefs is really important, but that doesn't necessarily need to be on a delivery day. They found often as well, when you're dropping off the chefs, they only have, they have 2 minutes to speak to you anyway, because they're in the middle of prep. So I think as long as we maintain, I'd say for anyone working with chefs, you've got to have that close relationship to them. So
got a question there from Bethan.
Have you invited the chefs to the farm for open days and communicating with them that way? That's a really good question. We've had not all of our customers, but most of them, I'd say, have been down to the farm to visit.
75%, right?
It's the most powerful.
It's the most powerful tool,
in terms of getting people to understand what we're working with?
It's actually it's a strong question, because it brings us into kind of some of the successes. If we move on from the challenges of the first year and start looking at some of the successes and the positives that we can really look at, I think that is definitely one of them. That's part of the kind of the catalyst for change amongst the Manchester kind of hospitality scene, is that we one of the major goals for us was to create a better food system by infiltrating the kitchen, the restaurants, the places that serve the most food to the masses. And by being able to get these cooks and chefs and restaurant owners and bar owners out to a farm that's within an hour drive away from the city, and talk to them as we're talking now, and discuss these things and these issues, and show them how delicious produce can be if you're growing it the right way. That is the power of what you can do in this system, and certainly something that we want to focus on more and more and more going forward into the next few years.
It's certainly one of the things that like how I ended up meeting you was through that. And what drew me as a grower to working with chefs and working with restaurants was that that kind of connection to the public, and the power for change. That it can feel a bit sapping and kind of a bit depressing when you're a grower, you're on the farm on your own, and you're trying to convince people that this is better food, and to get better food we have to do it this way. And yeah, it can feel difficult, and it's hard to convince someone about making a change in their lifestyle or changing their way of eating by talking to them about soil and climate and that kind of those big abstract things. But if we've provided a restaurant with some gorgeous veg, and then they've elevated it into this incredible dish, and while someone's sat there, with this taste explosion going off in their mouth, the server is telling them about where it's come from and basically what has had to happen for that turnip to taste so much better than any turnip they've ever eaten. Then they're hooked, because that's so powerful. When you're eating and in a kind of in a sort of, it's probably in a bit of a brain science neurological way, but in just a philosophical way as well. When you're eating, I think, and you've had a couple of glasses of wine and you're sharing a meal with friends, you're much more open and kind of open to inspiration, I think. So that sort of stuff, I think, really kind of, it gets into people, and then people go home and they're looking at, we have people messaging us, how can we get your veg? And
well, that's definitely something we want to work on, isn't it, for next year, is to try to get not only into, I think that's part of the year 2 vision, really, we'll get into in a minute, but it's definitely what we plan to do, to try to get it into more people's hands. I think one of the other big successes for me was bringing on a young female grower into the operation. So Michael, I mean, when we first set up, it was there's a fourth partner as well, Daniel, and it's the 4 of us plus the employees that we have in our other business, in our hospitality business. But we built the farm by hand, physically in the cold of winter. It was pretty brutal. And then Michael we identified fairly early on that Michael was going to need an assistant grower. It wasn't possible to just do the whole season alone, because we weren't able to support him physically out there for the whole year. We obviously put in a lot of labor where we could, but essentially we needed an assistant. Michael identified Joe. Do you want to just introduce Joe and sort of how that worked and how the relationship grew?
So like just put out job application on kind of all the usual places, and initially was looking for like a seasonal grower to come in for the first 6 months for over the summer, and then so she's finished now, and then that was the plan, to kind of do that within the first year, so that we weren't putting on that pressure of bringing on someone on permanent when we didn't really know what our finances were going to look like by the end of the year. But yeah, like I'd kind of narrowed it down to sort of 5 candidates. And to be honest, I would have had any of them. Like the skill level of the talent of young growers out there is really amazing. We just need the land now to put them all on. But Jo really stood out. So she'd worked in kitchens before, so that was really important. She understood it from that side, what chefs are used to. She was really, I could just tell she was really like kind of committed to doing things properly. She'd worked on a farm before and was kind of talking about how inefficient a lot of things were, which was kind of music to my ears, thinking about kind of lean farming and that sort of stuff, and making sure everything's really tight. And yeah, she was Scouser as well, like me, so that was good. And to be honest, like, to do with the decision. Yeah, but to be honest, in probably a small way, that was kind of things like, I didn't come into grow. I'm 31 now. I didn't come into growing until I was 24, and it's, now I can see that it's what the gods kind of made me to do. But it took me so long to find it because, growing up in Liverpool, my careers guidance officer didn't say, do you want to be an organic farmer? So it took a long time to find that. And so I kind of saw that in Jo as well, as like, this amazing talent and drive and passion, and would potentially go to waste because there's not a huge amount of places looking for that. So I was really excited to be able to bring her on. And then with the view of kind of was bringing on a staff member, as I was saying, for the season, and then probably looking at bringing someone on again next year. But she's just been absolutely incredible, coming in every day with like new ideas. We built our own fridge this year, and so and her carpentry skills are way better than mine, so it would not have, it probably wouldn't have been standing still if she hadn't have taken over on that. So yeah, it's just been amazing to provide that, and going into next year, we are, not to jump ahead too much, but we are looking at kind of expanding the infrastructure on our site so we can welcome volunteers as well. Because having the...
Well, do you want to get... I was going to ask Richard to maybe just talk a little bit about the Foradori and the Noma stuff, and working with plat fields, and just to look at still some of the, we're looking at successes of that we can take away from the first year, and something that also ties into this conversation of like having people out there and communicating to people. Do you want to just discuss what we did with Foradori and how that worked, and the educational collaborative side of that?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think it just for me, it relates back to the fact that there are multiple individuals within the setup of Cinderwood. We each sort of come at it with different skill sets, and I think what's really important is for us always to try and gain more exposure about what we're doing to a wider audience. We've been able to do that via a couple of different sort of extracurricular events throughout the year. We actually have a very close relationship with a wine importer called Newcomer Wines. They are based down in London, but work with winemakers and producers who farm regeneratively and either organically or biodynamically, and a lot of their principles align and coexist with ours on the farming side. So they actually approached us. We took them to Cinderwood midway through this summer on a burning hot day, put them to work on the ground, and they totally got it within minutes, didn't they? Really, in terms of what was needed.
I think that what Peter identified immediately was how close and how similar to what we were doing to grow. The wine growers in Italy it's like it's agriculture. It's a common bond. You share.
Absolutely.
people often forget that if you're making wine, you're in agriculture. You're reliant on the weather patterns. You're reliant on soil health. Certainly, if you're growing organically,
rely on the labor.
Yeah. So that was the common bond there, wasn't it?
Yeah, and that really inspired, I think, Peter to bring a whole host of peers and industry colleagues around a table to talk about the challenges and the everyday sort of occurrences that goes on running an operation like that. And in August we hosted about 15 people in total at Cinderwood and on Jane's farm. It was a real meeting of minds. Throughout the day, we took them on a tour around Cinderwood itself. Michael spoke, Joseph spoke to the group. We then cooked with produce from Cinderwood and the beef from Jane's farm. And to see that, happen like it did was incredibly powerful. At the same time, those are industry peers and colleagues that do also already understand and think that way. We have a close relationship with Noma, which is an estate within Manchester. They work closely with a creative practice called Standard Practice, and they actually invited us. They'd heard about our values and principles as what we do at Cinderwood, and invited Michael to come and run a market stall for a day, which I think was incredible for you. It's a different type of customer. It's not a partner restaurant that we're working with. It's not Michael. It wasn't talking to chefs on that day. Yeah, you were effectively giving the produce.
Yeah, it's really good,
directly into people's hands. Yeah, and they were bringing their children up to the market stall, and that for me is just as important and just as powerful as the relationships we have with the chefs in Manchester, is to talking to the wider public and a wider audience about what we do. And you just got to hope that trickles down and filters through the sort of local society as it does, and has an equally important impact.
Well, it was amazing, the event we had at the Sourdough event we had on Jane's farm and at Cinderwood, was that we were talking about it. It's amazing to see us all come together and see kind of what the future can look like. I think we're all very optimistic about the future of food. I think when you see stuff from kind of COP26, you're like, oh God, everything, we're doomed. But actually, on a day-to-day basis, working with people producing food, the future looks really bright. It's really exciting. There's a lot of people coming around to it, and to have that meal where we had the veg from Cinderwood, the beef from Jane's farm, which is the best beef I've ever tasted, and these incredible wines. It was like, okay, we're talking about, and
all the people responsible for those things.
Yeah, all the people
in the same around the same table. It's pretty powerful.
And it was like we were talking about what the future, what the food revolution looks like, but also it's like, well, this is what it tastes like, and it tastes incredible. So
it's pretty funny talking to the younger brother, the winemakers from Tuscany. They're from.
Yeah,
Trentino. That he just could not believe how much grass there was. He was like, it's like, how is it? Yeah, we just don't have this. Like where we are, it's too hot. Like just could not believe how much grass. He just kept going back to the weeds, and he was like, man, you guys have got a serious issue. How do you deal with that? And we're like, we don't really know. We're figuring it out as we go along.
Yeah,
I just want to I'm going to try and answer to the that question that you asked, Ellen, about economics, the turnover covering the salaries. Yes. Well, we were from our side of that's sort of how this relationship is working, in that we're trying to share the responsibility of of running it, Cinderwood, as a legitimate business. The whole point is that we need to be able to legitimize what we're doing, and it needs to work as a realistic system. So we are extremely tight with studying the P&L, the profit and loss accounts, and trying to stay on top of that at all times. Do you want to delve into a little bit more transparency on that, and how covering, I mean, that's to be completely honest, that's why we only had Joe working with us. We would have absolutely loved to have kept Joe permanently.
Yeah.
But the conversation with her was completely honest from the start, and was, look, we're in our first year. We need to offer you a 6-month contract as a seasonal grower. If we are in a position at the end of the summer that we could offer you, renew your contract and keep you through the winter, we would. But at the moment, you have to come into this knowing that it's a seasonal position for 6 months. The whole aim of Cinderwood, really, from a financial perspective, is that if it can cover its costs and provide Michael the salary and provide us, produce, that we buy the produce for the same price as everybody else, then it works. And if it can pay back the startup capital over the period of its lifetime, then it is a realistic system. But I mean, it's been a struggle the first year for sure. I mean, we've been pretty close to,
we've survived.
We've been pretty close to the bone, to be fair, and we don't have much money left at all to get through winter. And Michael probably will need to look at getting temporary work through the colder months. Also, because we're running out of crops, right? We've basically run out of steam a little bit going into winter, to be completely honest. Like, it's, I don't know, do you want to put your perspective?
Not from an enthusiasm perspective.
No, not loads of enthusiasm, but there's not many vegetables left.
Yeah, well, it's I think for the first year was kind of always going to be hard. And there was that mad quote from, it was like during the George Bush era, it came to me the other day. It was one of George Bush's like right-hand men, I think it was like Rumsfeld or Cheney or something like that, said, he was talking about the war, and he said, like, we have known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns, and people like like, what are you talking about? That makes no sense. And then it came to me the other day that it kind of does that. Like, we knew what we knew going in. We knew that there was things that we were going to have to find out, and we knew, okay, we're not sure about this, we don't know how that's going to happen. And then there was things that we didn't even think of that just cropped up, and we're like, okay. So the first year was like incredibly difficult, the most difficult year of my life by a long way. But that's what growing pains feels like. It hurts the most when you're growing the most, both personally and literally. But yeah, like so it has been really tough, and I think a lot of growing projects are really tough in the first year, are really tough for the first few years. But I mean, the great thing is that we're not, so I was speaking to Joe the other day, and we're not sitting here scratching our heads thinking, God, how are we going to make more money? We know that, there was times, as Joe was saying before, that we had too much of things. There was definitely times we didn't have enough of other things. But now we have that data of kind of what chefs want, so we can focus it a lot more. And
the data is extremely powerful. I mean, going into the first year, literally not knowing if you're even going to be able to sell a lettuce, or if, at least now. And I think this is a good time to move into the vision for year 2, which is, it's to go into some of these points for where we want to improve, and where we see ourselves going, and hopefully in a better position this time next year. Is that data is essentially where it all starts. It's like, we now have collected one full growing season's worth of figures, and we know exactly who and which kitchens and customers and partners require what, things that they like and things they don't like. We plan to go back probably next week, actually, to sit with certainly a number of the bigger customers and say, look, this is what you had. This is what do you want us to grow for you next year? And hopefully we'll be a little bit less variable and more just kind of a fixed, you know, you told us to grow 500 onions for you, and this is what we've done, and so you've kind of have your responsibility on your end is now to take those onions.
I'm going to come to your restaurant with the flame weeder if you don't. But yeah, that's like definitely, you know, we've people have had a year to get used to the way that we work and working with us, so it's really like so excited to go into the second year. We got some more questions coming in.
Well, I think to get on to that third one, because if we're on the subject of it right now. Data for new market gardens can be collected before. I mean, we tried to do that a little bit, didn't we?
I think like we didn't go in completely blind. We had, we had ideas about what people would want, you know, for, you know, just basic things like we know that turnips are popular and Swedes aren't, you know, basic things like that. So we knew what to grow. But
now we're getting requests for Swedes.
Now we are getting requests for Swede tops. Blanched Swede tops. So I'm looking forward to giving that a go. I'll die a happy man if I can make Swedes happen. I think like, you can do that. You can collect data from people. I think I don't know if you've looked at Ben Hartman's book, The Lean Farm, but he talks about at the beginning of that. So he got all this inspiration from like the way that I think it's Toyota works in Japan in this like super lean kind of system. And there's this great kind of anecdote about like kind of one of the presidents or one of the engineers or something of Toyota, and they were designing a new car which was to be like a people carrier sold in America. And he said to be able to design it, he needed to spend like I think it was like 6 months or something driving around America. So he needed to feel kind of what, you know, on an individual basis, what that was like. And, you know, he found out all these things about, you know, you need massive cup holders and you need to be able to stop off at whatever their version of B&Q is and get like a shelf in. So he took all that data, and I think it's the same with us. You know, we did have an idea, and we had chefs telling us what they like, but then through the year, you see what they actually really value. So it does. I think you can do a lot of that, but I think you got to kind of
we now have the hard data, so we can really try to plan better. I just want to going to bring Jane in because you're asking about the synergy between market gardens and livestock. It might actually be good, if you are comfortable, to answer this other question. What weeds do you have? Because I think you probably know.
Jane can tell you what weeds we have because she put them there.
So they're not weeds, are they?
No, there's no such thing as weeds.
I was about to say.
Yeah.
They're the plants you don't want around your vegetables. But they're a lot of them are the herbal lays that we overseeded on ryegrass. So we've on the livestock farm, we've tried not to plough, not to kill, not to reseed. We basically, when we want to add more diversity in a field, we just crop it really short by the cattle. They mush it up a bit, then we might harrow it, and then we direct drill or we scatter varied. So all those weeds are edible to cattle. You know, you get the odd bit of ragwort, but that's easily dealt with. So it did cause a problem for these guys. But so the question I put in about is the synergy between market gardens and livestock. I know that one of the problems here, or I have heard in recent days and at the opening session, I felt the same thing a little bit, that often market gardens are led by people who believe that we shouldn't really be eating animals, at least that it should be minimal. Whereas, of course, if you go back to the way that subsistence farmers in the UK lived centuries ago, it is the perfect cycle of production. So I don't know, you know, and I think sort of chickens are a huge part in that. Pigs are another fantastic element in that design. And I'm a beef farmer, so I think you surround them by sort of an agroforestry-led regenerative pasture feeding model. These things should work very well hand in hand. And I had a conversation yesterday with a lady who, they're looking to expand their acreage for a market garden. And for me, in 200 acres, it's not difficult for me to give up 1 acre to a market garden, particularly if it then sustains some chickens and pigs for me with their excess, their glut that they can't get profitable margins from. That grows a very high quality protein that you can then sell on. And the manure from animal, one of the questions I had for you, Mike, because it always interests me, is that because you're taking your harvest off the land, it's that refertilization is presumably one of your major hurdles and problems to solve. For me, the obvious way to solve it is by putting animal manure on that I've sort of grown elsewhere. So I actually see a fantastic synergy between livestock and plant farming, but we do have the fundamental issue that often, market gardens and plant-based diets, you don't like the two things to go together.
Yeah, I'm glad you've raised that, because it ticks me off a little bit as a seeing people kind of, there was that article in the Guardian, I think it was about a couple of months ago, about how damaging like kind of beef is to the environment and that stuff. But what never seems to get mentioned is how it's grown, which is really important. Steve was telling me, Jane's livestock manager, he was on holiday in Spain the other weekend and drove through that massive polytunnel city. So that's all vegetables, but that's like miles and miles and miles of kind of plastic using a huge amount of water and resources. I actually think vegetable production can never be as kind of regenerative as cattle and sheep, as ruminants. I think just the rumen is like the perfect kind of regenerative organ. So us working together is really important. It kind of, I'm not against veganism. I like that. I like that people, as a society as a whole, we're eating less meat, and I like that people are starting to talk about where their food comes from and think about where their food comes from. So I think that's only a good thing. But it does give me panic attacks when vegans think that veg growers are going to be able to produce all the food. Just when, with kind of a late frost is no problem for Jane's cattle. But it could wipe out crops for us. So the future massively includes livestock, and I think Joe would be great to talk about. So one of the big kind of influences for the way we work is The Third Plate, a book by Dan Barber, and that is like really talks about kind of this synergy.
I was literally just thinking. I honestly was just thinking about that. For me, it's not about eating one or the other, and it's not about relying on one or the other. It's about trying to flip the ratio of how much we eat. That's how we try and serve food here. It's like you might have a plate full of bitter leaves, which Michael's grown, with a very small amount of cured ox heart grated over the top, or just trying to flip this ratio of how much meat is on the plate against the veg. I don't know if Jane actually agrees with me with that, because I know you feel you.
No, absolutely, I do. I mean, but one of the sort of meat growers' strap lines in my world is less meat but better. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, exactly that, and also not eating high off the hog. So you're not just eating the loin and the bacon and the fillet. You're eating the whole beast, which is really what is the difficult thing more than anything, because you go back to convenience. It's even for if we're completely honest, if we work 15 hours here 4 days in a row, do I want to go home and cook some oxtail? Absolutely not. I mean, I don't even go home and cook a bloody lettuce, so that's not the best example, but like, you know, you don't have time to, in this day and age, to kind of spend those hours in the kitchen. And it's difficult, it's cultural, it's education that's passed down through generations that you see in places like Spain and France and Italy. This like generational cooking that we've lost totally.
Understanding.
Can I just pick up on Beth's question then?
Yeah, go on.
Another one, presumably of her provocative questions, is that about make sure the food revolution isn't elitist and accessible to all. What's made the idea of it elitist is that we've narrowed the amounts of the animal and the types of vegetables that we will eat and the seasons in which we will eat them. If you solve all that bit, the price is not as high as it artificially currently is. You know, people say that food's too cheap. Well, it kind of is in certain places and it isn't in others. What's cheap is crap food. What's expensive is brilliant food. And what we need to do is make brilliant food cheaper by using the whole animal, by using more sustainable systems, by lowering the inputs to create it in the first place. And it is no longer an elitist product. That's my hope and belief.
Yeah, well, but also it goes back to what I was just saying then about the you know, general culture, in that I was talking to Danny at Holy Grain Sourdough, and his perspective is, you know, he's using tiny grain farms and small mills to create incredible sourdough bread and rye loaf and other baked goods. Those grains fundamentally are up to 2 or 3 times more expensive than cheap white flour, because it's not denuded, it's full of nutrition, it's full of fiber and bran and flavor, it's been grown correctly by hand, it's been milled by hand, and it's not shelf stable, so it costs you more money to produce it. But people tell him that £4.50 is a rip-off for a loaf of sourdough that can feed 4 people, either, you know, a lunch and a breakfast, or 2 breakfasts in a row, or, you know, can survive in your house for a few days, provide you sustenance. However, you'll go to the pub and buy a pint of Stella for £5. And what is that? That is like the most industrialized, mass-produced grain juice, essentially, that's made from shit, you know, wheat or barley or whatever it is, and then, you know, fermented and sold for £5. And you'll do that all day long, and people will sit in the pub and drink, you know, spend 50 quid on that. But so why are we then looking at a loaf of bread as expensive? It's a cultural perspective. It's the same thing we encounter quite a lot with the organic movement of growing high quality produce, is that it can be seen as elitist, and people can potentially, you know, think it's fancy. You know, there is absolutely nothing fancy about working 15 hours in torrential weather, freezing, being, you know, working with your hands manually day in, day out. There's nothing elitist about that at all. It's the complete opposite of it. But somehow, because of kind of commercialization and agribusiness and the kind of advertising and the way that the word organic has been picked up on and used in supermarkets over the past few generations to sell things at a higher price point, we've been labeled with it being elitist, but it is actually fundamentally the opposite of that. But we've got to try and like flip it back around a little bit, and that's difficult. And that's what we're trying to do with this whole project, is try to put this stuff in people's mouths and in their hands, and get people excited about it again.
And that reverts back to the importance of, you know, having a restaurant or a wine bar as the vehicle, to raise that awareness.
But so Cinderwood, it was always important for Cinderwood to partner with restaurants of all different kind of aspects. So we work with
bakeries and delis.
Yeah, we work with fine dining restaurants like Manure, who've are cooking Michelin-starred food in a tasting menu experience at over £100 a head. We're also working with pizzerias that sell pizzas, which everybody's getting access to. We're selling it in a wine bar. We're selling produce to a bakery that's just putting lettuce in sandwiches. We're trying to approach the entire food system and make it accessible to everybody so that you can get more regeneratively grown produce to the wider demographic.
It'd be interesting, Bethan, it'd be interesting to hear kind of your thoughts on it. And
yeah, for sure. You've got, get in there.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't want to, co-opt the entire conversation.
Oh, no, get in.
It's just something that has come up a lot about, we're growing regenerative food and it is a higher price because we need more value. We need to pay the growers what is fair. And there's a CSA down near London where they're only paying their grower £10,000 a year. Well, that's not a sustainable living income, and that's not fair either. But you're selling your veg boxes in an organic market garden shop or wherever for £20 a box, and you're like, well, how do we get that balance? And I totally agree with Jane that people need to become more aware, and I agree with you guys, like take all the food from the food banks to your high-end restaurants to make sure it's accessible to all, and have a sliding scale of price. And your grade A quality produce or your micros can go to the fine dining, and then some of the veg that might be a bit, I don't want to say bruised or broken, but not the category A stuff, but send it to the food bank or the social cooking groups so that they can cook it and eat it. And not that I think there's a whole wide range. We need to make sure it is accessible to all. And I don't. Yeah.
Is that a good point to bring in Eat Well, maybe?
Yeah, because we've worked with.
We did touch on it a bit. Yeah, we
a group called Eat Well in Manchester who they started up at the start of lockdown, I think, to pointed at kind of people struggling to feed themselves, basically, before the lockdown. But obviously that COVID added an extra layer of pressure onto that with people losing work and stuff. So we've kind of provided them with veg a couple of times. That's definitely something we'd like to do going forward. Because I think one of the things is, waste kind of drives the price up, right? And I remember someone telling me about someone who was an organic farmer, and he's actually switched back to conventional using sprays and stuff like that, because he hated the waste in organic growing. He was a big farmer, so he was grown for supermarkets. So obviously anything, as you say, anything slightly knobbly or not the right size or shape was just left in the field. So he was like devastated by that as someone who just wanted to feed people. So yeah, kind of finding a vehicle for all of the food is really important. So whether that's giving things to charity. It's difficult with food banks because often they can't take perishable stuff. But one of the great things about Eat Well was they were taking food, doing these dinners and basically fundraisers that the money from that was going towards food banks, which is another way of doing it. Also, when we did have a glut of loads of courgettes, which became marrows, it was Jane's pigs who were fattening up on them. So that was great to kind of find that outlet for it.
That was nice that you brought that in, actually, Jane. We didn't get to touch on that. This also going into the vision of year 2, we really need to try to explore further how we can make more symbiosis between the two. Because there was times when we had, we were dealing with wheelbarrows full of like split tomatoes or, cucumbers, like Michael said, when the rain came and we just had marrows all of a sudden, like overnight marrows, which we did actually manage to cook a few at the Sourdough thing, which is cool. But apart from that, we were able to get a few wheelbarrows of stuff down to the pigs. And that for me was like the first time we were able to really see the power of how the two operations could work side by side. And we definitely need to further on it next year in a more structured system. But it's difficult when you don't have the sort of mental capacity or the physical capacity to actually just even take your wheelbarrows of like veg down to the pigs. It's like you need systems to
it
help
all
work
needs
that
to be
out.
factored in.
Yeah,
from the
because
beginning.
it's so even then, you know, at the end of a day of work, you're like, oh man, I really want to take this down there, but it's fucking miles away, and I'm just like, it's gonna. You're adding another, you know, you're adding another 40 minutes onto your day, and it's raining, and you're like, oh, can I? But that's what it's all about, really, isn't it? Trying to explore that. So,
and sorry, go ahead.
So, you know, the app Olio, which is like an app that shows free food around the city, either from supermarkets or things. So in Nottingham, we were looking at using that for growers as well. So being able to say that we've got a glut of tomatoes, who wants to pick it up? Is there a group that can maybe add value? So we've got a few like big community kitchens that then cook for things. So can they take it and turn it into a secondary product? But Olio, we were trying to work with the public health in the county council, and Olio gave them the price, and it's just stupid prices to make it work for growers. So
but suddenly, you're into the whole trying to break down systems again, trying to break existing infrastructure that is not set up to work this way. It's the same. There's a similarity there between us and the ordering systems with chefs. It's just like these systems are so deep rooted and have been going for so long that even when you find somebody that is excited enough to engage in a conversation with you, when it gets down to the fundamentals, it's like, well, that would have been cool, but I guess it doesn't really work. It's very difficult.
Can I throw a curveball into the conversation, which is perhaps something that we can pick up another time, all of us, if there's an energy for that. The corporate social responsibility thing is massive and growing, and businesses have got to start carbon offsetting. They've got to start publicly showing their corporate social responsibility. I think in localities as well, you know, they're offsetting it in the Amazon rainforest and things, which in itself is just a nonsense. Nobody knows what's happening there. You can't keep control over it. We've got problems here that need dealing with. The things that I'm hearing everybody talk about, I'm thinking, well, you know, if you've got spare veg, but it's a cost to you to not use it. You're not getting it back as compost. There's an inherent loss of cost to you. You can't afford to do that. You're a startup business. You've got food banks that want it, but they can't cook it. You've got other people that perhaps could cook it, but that's going to cost them. The corporates, you can, if you can package that up as a CSR offer, you can get them to pay for all those bits in between, and the people on the ground might not therefore see it as a loss. But I don't know, that's a future discussion.
Definitely, yeah, that's definitely a big discussion, isn't it? I mean, looking at what you're saying, Ellen, about not wanting to undermine sales, is that from the market gardener's perspective
it's definitely a talking point.
It's 100%, you know, because then you enter this. I can give you an example of that straight away with Blackfield's Market Garden, who's one of our greatest allies and mentors and peers to us, because they've been doing it for 4 or 5 years, and they're an incredible community garden in Manchester that work very closely within a city centre community. But you know, so we were sometimes you'd be able to call them and say, guys, like, we're in the shit. We've got loads of cucumbers and courgettes, and it might be something that they don't have a lot of. They've got a box scheme going through the summer, and they'd say, all right, well, look, if you sell it to us at wholesale price, we can put it in the boxes. So we sort of try and help them. They help us, most importantly, and they would take some glut where they could. But then you've then got people that know those guys, and then they say, well, can I order this? Well, yeah, but then can I have it at the price that you're selling it to Plattfields? No, and then you have to try to explain, like, no, you have to pay more. Why do I have to pay more? Well, because that's how it works. But it's not an easy or comfortable conversation.
No, but everybody understands sales and Black Friday and all that. It's just the same thing, you know.
Yeah, Michael's going to get his cabbages on Black Friday.
Yeah, I'll put the prices up to £10 a cabbage now.
Cabbage seeds.
And then it'll be £1 a cabbage on Black Friday.
Exactly. Yeah. But you know, there is nothing that is a static cost. It's a supply and demand.
Yeah, well, that's where we started to fluctuate prices. We did dabble a bit with that during the summer with like when you needed to get rid of something, you have to drop the price on it and take the hit, because otherwise you're gonna lose out in the long run.
Yeah.
But I think we start trying to conclude for 5-10 minutes. Do you want to go into like some of the vision for year 2 and how we're planning to like really, how we're really trying to move forward into the right direction and get a much better head start going into year 2 than obviously we had in year 1.
Well, yeah, I'll leave the cropping to you, Michael. But I think for me, you know, just like you raised, Beth, and the importance of bringing or being able to accommodate visitors to the site is of the utmost importance in terms of having the amenities and facilities on sites. For example, you know, a very simple compost loo system would be is actually what I'm asking for Christmas for.
Yeah.
It's that would help hugely in terms of being able to accommodate visitors in a comfortable manner. And you know, that in turn, you know, we would love to get to a point whereby we're able to host talks, you know, and host conversations such as these, which I think go a long way in helping people understand, you know, the greater challenges and, you know, efforts that we're trying to put into the food system. I think from a cropping angle, you know, I feel certainly a lot more comfortable in, you know, given what we've been through this year, knowing what chefs you know, want to see on their menus, and them too being more understanding of the fact that they need to be even more agile and nimble and flexible with their menu design throughout the seasons, which will hopefully in turn make Michael's you know, role a little bit more easier.
So we were on the cropping thing. Obviously, we're staying on the, you know, we've got space to expand, but we're going to stay on the 1 acre. We're not looking to do anything too ambitious again. It's just literally doing everything again, but better, doing everything tighter, you know, putting in that kind of knowledge and really tightening it up and leaning it and making it more efficient and that kind of stuff in terms of cropping. We're looking at doing a box scheme out of the wine bar here. So we'll grow for that. And then also, you know, making the site available for doing educational stuff is that's kind of that's something valuable in and of itself. But if what's going to make things easier for growers and food producers going forward is a populace that is more food savvy and more food educated, and that, you know, that's one of the things I'm really kind of optimistic about. I see the way that food is changing, how people are going back to kind of cooking things properly, and people are getting interested in real food again. So, you know, if we can do things like this, kind of ties together a couple of points we've put together. But, you know, we were talking about using the kind of what you'd say maybe the secondary cuts of livestock and things like, you know, using blood and offal and all that kind of stuff. And it's the same with veg, you know, using the stuff that's a little bit slug damaged. What you need is food education there. So it's very easy for someone to take a really nice rump steak and cook that, because they know they just put some butter in the pan and put it on, and that's it, and they've got a great steak. And the same with, you know, if you've got perfect kind of lettuce, then it's really easy because you just chop that and it's into your salad bowl, and that's fine. But, you know, what do you do with like loads of kind of turnips where a third of it is being eaten by a slug? Well, you can process stuff like that. And, you know, I dropped off to a customer on Wednesday, and he still had our green tomatoes and courgettes, and it was just like, yeah, of course, like British
preserved,
preserved, of course. You think British seasonality means, well, you can't eat courgettes in the winter. It's like, of course you can. And actually they taste incredible, you know. So our kind of seasonality, you can eat these things, they just need to be processed, and obviously that takes a lot more. It takes skill and education. So we would look like having, you know, by educating people, we're expanding the market for ourselves and for other growers. Because then that would open up the thing to kind of doing, you know, I see with like looking at kind of Riverford and stuff, you can get a smoothie box or a juicer box. But it'd be great to be able to do a really cheap pickling box, and everything in there is like, you know, has already been half eaten by the inhabitants of our farm. But if you have the skill, you know, like, okay, well, that, you know, that bit's damaged, cut that bit off. It's really cheap. The rest is getting sliced up and pickled. And so suddenly that damage isn't a problem. We can sell it at a lower price. But people still see the value in that because they're pickling it. So they know that, okay, they're going to buy, you know, the value is reduced by it being pest damaged. But then as soon as you put that in some vinegar and salt and whatever they do, the three things mix that, I don't know what they do, but as soon as, you know, someone gets hold of it, pickles it, then the value suddenly shoots right up on it. You know, like a jar of pickled tomatoes on Boxing Day with some cheese, like the value of that is absolutely immense. And that might have come from overripe, half damaged tomatoes. So it's really important that we create that understanding both for livestock and veg, you know, making sure everyone kind of knows how to use food. How would we market this half-eaten pickling veg? Yeah, I think that I actually, in what my biographer will call the lost year, I worked for Riverford for a bit in London. So I was like speaking to people buying Riverford boxes, and I was really surprised. Actually, people are really into, especially younger people, honesty from farmers. So like, it wouldn't actually be a bad idea to be like, slug munched beets and just put that on the thing. Like, I think people get a kick out of it because it's like they've grown up, you know, like me, eating Rustler's burgers and pot noodles and that kind of stuff that I could throw in the microwave when I got home from school. And so you grow up on that, and then when you see some actual real food that shows the mark of shows the mark of nature on it, you know, shows you can see the slug, not to get pagan on you, but the gods of the slug and the soil have got involved on that. And, you know, it's a real kick for people to be like, this is actual food, and it has problems.
It goes back to the story, you know?
Yeah, it goes back to the story.
The value of a story is like, it's invaluable. That's when you start to tell that to people, you're just adding value to something in a weird, in a kind of way.
Definitely.
There's also a theory that damaged produce has more micro and macronutrients because the plant has had to kick in with its chemical imbalances. So it might be quite something. There could be something in that.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, really interesting.
I didn't know that actually. I knew, you know, like every grower knows that we love getting to eat the split tomatoes because they started already kind of breaking down and the sugars have come out, so they're the tastiest. I'll look a bit more into that because that's, yeah. It makes a lot of sense.
Slugs clearly look for flavour as well.
Yeah. Slugs like flavour as much as.
I'll try and find the link. I've found it somewhere.
Yeah, we're approaching midday, which I think is our cut-off point. So, just open it up to any further questions that anyone may have.
Thanks for being so engaging. Anyway.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's been a really interesting discussion. It certainly makes you think more. I think that's the whole point of doing this, is just to try to reflect and think and
thanks, Georgie.
And you know, share our challenges and hear other people's, see that, you know, try to move forward with year 2 in a clearer idea of where we need to be going.
Yeah. And one of the kind of last things I'd like to say is just you know, we're over the next few days now, we're talking to other growers, and growers are coming together and talking, and then obviously the in-person meeting. But it's something we'd really love to do, and I think it happens. So I work down south, and that's where I trained on a farm, and the networks down there are a lot more kind of a lot more just wired in and built up, and there's a lot of people going to each other's farms quite informally, and it just be, for me, I think for all of us, really one of the amazing things to get out of the Northern Real Farming Conference would be more of that network. So thank you so much for setting it up and making this happen.
Yeah, sure.
Great, thank you very much. And maybe that's a fitting time to sort of draw it to a close. So yeah, if you aren't registered for the in-person, there are some farm visits, and yeah, we'll also be talking about our market garden in Lancaster and the Farm Start programme that's linked to that. So yeah, I can feel some pub conversations coming on as well. So yeah, just thank you hugely for all of your insight and sharing so openly as well. I know there was some questions in there that you may not have wanted to address. So yeah, thank you very much for that.
No, I think it's about transparency, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I'm sure the conversations will continue. And yeah, thank you so much, everyone.
Right.
Yeah,
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Cheers, guys.
Good to see everyone. Thank you.